Oh, hi. Okay, let me click on me here. Hi, my name is Bart Weiss. I'm the founder and director of the Dallas Video Festival. Our 28th festival is coming up October 12th through the 18th. And one of the things that I am really excited about showing this year is a wonderful documentary about Monty Python's performance. The film is called The Meaning of Life. And we are really happy to have a Google Hangout with its director, Roger Grafe. And Roger is in England right now, so it's early in the morning here, which is why I haven't shaved, but it's not so much in London. Roger, you there? Yes.
I am there, yes.
So
God.
of all the people I've interviewed and talked to, I don't know anybody who has had such a special title for all the work that you've done. So you are an OBE. What is an OBE?
It's the Order of British Empire, and I'm originally American, so to
Uh-huh.
get that was rather a big deal. You go to Buckingham Palace, and in my case, Prince Charles, gives you the medal, and it's a very nice thing to get, I can tell you. But the thing that I probably value more is BAFTA. I got a Lifetime Achievement Award from BAFTA, which is the equivalent of the American Academy,
Yeah.
and so that's sort of, I've been at this a very long time. So they're very nice to me about it.
So, do you want to talk about some of your earlier work? In reading up about you, the piece you did on the police, and particularly given the United States, this sort of sense of what we have about things going on with the police, and now people having cameras all the time and observing things. You want to talk about the film you made years ago?
Yes, it's interesting this because I've made nearly 50 films about the criminal justice system, and a lot of them about the police, including, by the way, in Dallas. I did a series called In Search of Law and Order for PBS,
Oh,
and we filmed in Fort Worth.
uh-huh.
Um, I was very interested in the justice system and in Fort Worth. They're very positive in dealing with young offenders, and I interviewed the police chief in Dallas at the
Oh,
same time.
oh,
Um,
sorry
and
we didn't get
what
together
I
then.
feel really, yeah, well, there's a good series. It's called In Search of Law and Order,
I will look it up.
US, and yeah, there are three parts. It was a co-production with KQED. What I felt was, and I still feel this, is that the police think they're in a movie, and it's very interesting that now they are in a movie, which either they've shot with a head camera or somebody else has shot on their mobile,
Yeah.
right, on their cell phone, and the difference between, well, I mean, if you go back to what was that prison, Abu Ghraib, right,
Yeah.
in Iraq, right, where that girl was standing on this pile of bodies, right, and taking a picture of herself doing this, and other people did. That idea that people don't really understand the power of the camera and the meaning of the images that people get now has been shown with these various shootings in America, which have been filmed.
Yeah.
And I think the power that we have in purely observational films, and a lot of my films are, I guess I could be argued as a sort of the British equivalent of Fred Wiseman in some ways,
Uh-huh.
because we're both very purist about a lot of the films we've made. Fred is entirely pure, but I use whatever I need to make the film work. And in the case of the police, the first series I did was just observational, right? It was 11 parts, just watching the cops in action. And it was a huge shock. We were actually, as it happens, the series Dallas was on at the same time. And we were two places, Dallas, and the ratings. We had 11 million viewers every week at 10 o'clock at night without any narration and no music and no titles. Just simply, the series was called Police. And for an hour, you watch the cops in action, right? And what you saw there was so different from the movie equivalent that it really did shock the country, because most of the time they had nothing to do with criminals. When they did, they didn't usually catch them. And it was a much more frustrating picture of what police work is like than the movie version, if you like. And so I became, over the That was in 1982. I became a criminologist. I'm actually a visiting professor at the LSE in London, London School of Economics. And I do write a lot. I've written books about the police because I keep saying to the cops, you guys don't understand your own job. It is not about shooting people or catching criminals. It's about solving problems and keeping order. And of course, the tragedy in America right now is so many times in places like Missouri and North Carolina and so on. So they're not. They're creating problems themselves. And our job as filmmakers is to reflect, I hope at least, the real experience of cops when they're not acting for the camera, as it were, when they are just simply going about their business.
And I think our job is quite different, in this context now where there are indeed cameras on the cops and people taking cell phones. The filmmaker's job is to put all that in context and to tell the story about it, as opposed to just having the facts as they show up. And I mean, your series sounds like it very much of a precedent for that. One of the things I'm really fascinated about is that in England, the documentary traditions are very similar to what we have here in the States, but the major difference is that a long time ago, like television, British television showed documentaries in prime time, and the audiences for documentaries there have been much richer for a much longer period of time. How did that happen?
Well, that's a really good question because I started my career as a theater director in New York and directed a couple of dramas for CBS. And they sold the studio there. And of course, documentaries were only 60 minutes, things like that, which would be huge ratios in 10, 15, 20-minute packages rather than an hour-long, hour-and-a-half long film. And Fred was one of the pioneers of the long documentary on CBS. But of course, that wasn't seen by as many people as NBC and so on. And when I got to England, I found that the BBC had established this tradition of treating the audience as intelligent and curious, even on BBC1, which is the equivalent of NBC or ABC. And as I say, on my police series, we were getting 11 million viewers, which is a colossal amount. And we were 2 places behind the spot of Dallas. So there's an appetite in Britain, and people are used to it, to watch intelligent, substantial documentaries. They don't need to have their hand held. We don't, I mean, although these days more and more people are using interviews and voiceover, there are a number of documentary makers like Kim Longinotto I've worked with, still never uses narration. And I think we're allowed that. I mean, Channel 4, which is a bit more experimental, but ITV as well, they see documentaries as part of the menu of giving people a kind of rich experience in television.
And it's a rich experience. It's not, quote, reality TV that we have here. And it really...
Some of that too. We do have some reality TV, but which I think actually started here, as a matter of fact.
Yeah.
But, I mean, this is a separate... it's a kind of irony for me that it's called reality TV, and we keep having to say, what's ours? Ours is real TV. What's the difference? It's a kind of...
It's different universe.
Joke, really. Awful joke, really.
Yeah. So let's talk about the film here. How did you get involved with the Pythons? I mean, I think it goes back a ways, doesn't it?
Oh, it goes back to the 70s. I've been making these observational films about very serious stuff, like the referendum, like how the European Union Commission works for the referendum, in boardrooms for companies, the police. I hadn't done the police series yet, but I did a series which was shown by PBS also, called The Space Between Words, in the UN, in a school, in a factory, just observational films that were, substantial and interesting, but they weren't funny, as it were. And then Beyond the Fringe and Monty Python got together to help raise money for Amnesty. Right. And I thought, and my sound man, Ian, said, "Why don't we go next to you guys putting that on stage?" So I called them and they said, "Yeah, sure enough." So we first film called Pleasure of Her Majesties, which was also shown on PBS.
Yes.
It's a lovely, lovely film, if I may say so. It still works. I saw it in Sheffield the other day. And then after that, we did The Secret Policeman's Ball, which is still in circulation in DVD and is very, very funny.
Yeah.
And I've actually ended up making 4 previous films with the Pythons and another 6 with John Cleese. And so when they did this big event, their last reunion at the O2 Arena in London, they had shot with a sort of home movie friend quite a lot of footage, like 80 hours of their previous stuff. And they said, well, let's make a documentary about this. So the producers did.
Uh-huh.
And the Python said, what we don't, this is really interesting, Bob. What they said is, we don't want a fan. We don't want someone who's going to suck up to us and is just going to be nice. What Roger knows us. So
Uh-huh.
he'll be straight, be honest.
Uh-huh.
And so they said, if Roger doesn't do it, we're not going to do it. So it was a condition of them making the documentary that I directed. So that was my 5th film with these guys.
Wow.
And I'm very proud of the film. I think it's very honest. They were very honest with us. Don't you think?
Absolutely. I mean, I think one of the things is if they just had somebody else like doing it who was either a fanboy or a younger person who sort of didn't understand the context, it would have been a completely different experience. There's something very honest in this film all the way through. You see them as themselves an awful lot. That you see the rehearsing, but there's a real sense of both them being on to you, like they're on as characters being on, and then there's like without the mask on, which you just don't get to see with the Pythons very much. So I think that for fans of the Pythons, it's an incredibly rare experience. And for those who like, I just totally missed that, it's a great sort of introduction to then go back to the beginning and sort of understand it and explore that material. Do you know that the go on? I'm sorry.
All right, go on.
Do you know that the Pythons?
No, ask the question.
In the United States got their start from the Dallas PBS station. We were the first station in the country to say, this is interesting, let's put this on TV. And sort of, I think we helped make this happen in the United States, which was obviously at its time, you know, quite influential to both our sort of idea of what comedy can be and also what television can be. I mean, it totally transformed the way like a skit runs and how a show goes together and the kind of insanity of dealing with, you know, proper world in a sense. So
well, actually, I should tell you, Spark, that the BBC almost pulled it. They didn't think it was funny, and they didn't understand it, and they didn't like the risks that were being taken all the time. They came very, very close to pulling after the first series.
Yeah, and that it stayed on and did so well is kind of an amazing thing. So what was it like during the shooting of this? Were there times when they said, don't shoot this or don't do this, or how did they kind of work with you?
Well, first of all, I've made 5 films now with a young director called James Rogan, who I like very much, who also shoots very well. So I said to them, look, I'm going to recruit James, and so we would do it together because there are 5 of them, and we wanted to be able to be in different places at the same time.
Sure.
And so when a director is shooting himself, then it's very nice to have a producer around who can can support them. And so in a way, we made the film together. Well, not in a way, we did. We made the film together, and it's brilliant because I'm 79, he's 36 or 33, and he's very small and looks about 12, and I'm relatively small and look about 65 or 70 anyway. And so the combination of this old guy and this young guy amused the Pythons. You know, John Cleese, when I introduced James, said, "Oh, I see you're robbing schoolboys now, are you?" You know, but they were amused by the fact that we were working so closely together, and I like that. It just kind of kept a sort of lightness to our being there. And as you see in the film, Eric Idle makes jokes about our being there, and so does Terry Gilliam.
Yes.
And there were times if they shut their dressing room door in a way that we could read from the body language meant don't go there, we didn't go there. And they didn't much like us filming them eating. We have a scene where they are eating. I'm not sure why that was a problem, but anyway, when somebody said, "Look, the canteen is off limits," we just didn't go there, except for that one occasion. So, we had rules that allowed them some space,
Uh-huh.
but on the whole, we were just following our instincts about where it would be interesting, where it would be fun. And also, by the way, it's so when this new huge auditorium there is very bleak in terms of architecture. There's absolutely no markings about in the hallways, no pictures, nothing. So the only it's a kind of austere set for all these jokes and all this fun that happens on stage and backstage. But if you notice in the corridor, we're in this bloody corridor all the time with nothing. It would be the least likely place you choose to make a comedy film.
And they're walking back and forth all the time, like in these corridors backstage, and with no sense of context. It's just like, it's very, shall we say, unglamorous backstage.
Exactly. But the minute they're there themselves, they bring the glamour with them.
Oh, totally. Okay, so I have to ask this, and you can choose not to answer. Throughout the film, they talk about we're doing this because of we need the money because
Terry Jones mortgage.
Right. So what happened? What is the story? Or are you free to tell us?
No, absolutely free to tell it because they tell it in the movie. Terry Jones bought a very expensive house in
right. Of course they do. Yes.
And in Highgate, and he mortgaged it to the hilt, and he's having serious trouble paying it off, and so that was a real problem. But most of all, the biggest problem they all shared was losing a lawsuit, which was brought by a man called Mark Forstater, who was the co-producer or whatever on Night of the Holy Grail, and Monty Python and the Holy Grail, and he had sued them about some share of the merchandising, and they said no, and so it took 7 years, and they lost. It was £1 million, which is nearly $2 million, that they owed in legal fees, and they had to pay them off. So they had the joint problem. Sorry, just to bear with me 1 second. You may want to switch it off. I have to tell my wife that the soup is ready. So just Susie, the tomato's gone.
So this is what happens when you're doing things live. Things are in your house, and you have to turn them on and off. And we're back live.
We are back.
Okay. Okay. So,
So anyway, they owed a lot of money. And a friend of Eric Idle's called Jim Beach, who was the manager of the Queen, by the way, of Queen, and a couple of other very big pop groups. He met them and said, "Look, you really, there's only one way you can do this, which is to put on a few performances and sell out this huge stadium, 16,000 seats." So that they put 5 shows online, and they sold out in 43 seconds. 43 seconds. Sold 5 times 16,000. What is that? 80,000 tickets. So they thought, oh, well, we better do another 5. But, and this is just, it's not in the film, but it's interesting. Robbie Williams had the week the next week. And he wasn't going to move. So they had to take down this huge set for a week and then put it back up again a week later. And they did 10 performances, which they sold out. So I think it hasn't quite paid off Terry's mortgage. I think he still owes about 300 grand, but it's gone a certain way towards that, and also paid their legal fees.
But it's wonderful for us that we get to sort of see them get up in front of people and do it again. And for me, it's like this joy of seeing these guys who I clearly remember doing a lot of these routines when they're young, and seeing them do it as they're older and do it so well, and sort of see the connection between them so much later in life. It's really kind of beautiful. It's almost like as if the Beatles, like after John Lennon decided to like get up and do like one more show, and they played "I Want to Hold Your Hand," and we got to sort of have that moment. And so we got it with the Pythons.
Well, one of the things I should tell you that I hope comes across in the film is that every one of those 16,000 fans each night felt just what you described, that they were in on something special.
Yeah.
And it just carried. So not every, frankly, I didn't tell them this, but I don't think every sketch they did was all that great. And some of the Eric Idle musical numbers, you know, again, wouldn't necessarily be my taste, but the experience, the total experience was terrific. So it carried, you didn't sit there saying, well, I like this, I don't like that. You just went with it. It was just pure joy.
Yeah, I imagine, and in watching the film, you can sort of feel like you're there at a historic thing that you just like happen to be lucky enough to sort of get in, and I guess you were quick enough on the draw to get a seat to sort of experience. But you got the experience of sort of spending time with them when they were younger and their time with them now. How do you sense the difference between those two?
Well, that's a very good question, which actually nobody's asked me really ever. I have to think about this, Bart. What is the difference? Well, for a start, Cleese is mellow, which is very nice. He's much married again and seems to be happy, and his happiness affects the others. They're all scared of him, right?
Yeah, you get that sense that he rules the room.
Yeah, well, yes. And because of that, when he's still serious about work, he's an absolute perfectionist. I mean, when I did one show with him, he came into the cutting room and said, that cut is a quarter of a second too long. And you just think, a quarter of a second, please, you know, but he wasn't kidding.
Yeah.
And he's such a perfectionist that was a feeling that dominated a lot of their earlier work. And then he says, actually, in the film, he's given up being a perfectionist, and actually he uses the occasion to kind of break up Mike Palin and Terry and everybody else. You know, he's a rascal in this production, but he's a loving rather than a sort of tyrannical rascal as he used to be. And it was a pleasure. I mean, he was just great. But I'll give you an example of what he's like. Okay, we all appeared on stage at Tribeca Film Festival. Okay,
yes,
and everyone else had seen it and seen it twice and given us comments. John hadn't seen it, hadn't bothered to see it, if you like, and which is very surprising, but he hadn't. So he sees it for the first time on stage in front of 1,000 people, and James, my co-director, says when we start the Q&A, John, what did you think of it? And he says, in front of 1,000 people, well, it's just what I expected from you guys, meretricious rubbish. Right? And we just, I thought, okay, I hope he's kidding. But the 1,000 people didn't, you know, he was scary again. And then he said, no, I'm only kidding. I love it. It's brilliant. Right? Now, I've made 11 films with John, right? In one capacity or another for him. And this is the first time he said something really nice. Okay. You know, after how many years? 76 to 2015. That's 40 years, right? For 39 years, we've been working together off and on. And and now that's what I mean by him being mellow, you know. And he gave me a huge hug at the end of it and said, "Well, Roger, what are we going to do next?" So, you know, it's very nice.
Something?
No, not yet. No, I'm biding my time, if you like. But I'm just saying, John, the big difference, I think, is John. Terry is starting to lose his memory, which is, again, he was very sharp and very intense and fought a lot with John over ideas. Terry Jones, that is, not Gilliam. Terry Gilliam, since then, has moved from being an outsider American into being a hugely successful opera director in his new incarnation, and also film director. And so for him to go back in this situation to being the outsider again was kind of awkward, but he's much more self-aware, much more confident. Mike Palin is always the same. He's just a lovely, lovely, sweet guy. Eric Idle wasn't in the earlier Amnesty shows, so I really only got to know him this time around, and I liked him very much, but I don't know the difference. And who else? And Graham Chapman, of course, has died. So in that sense, that's one of the differences. Graham was very funny in the version in my Amnesty comedies, but he was also drinking in those. We've even filmed him drinking. So poor guy. But they're very, very talented, and they're very different from each other. So it's an interesting cocktail of all these personalities.
So Roger, you've been making films now for a long time. You could easily retire. I mean, you've done pretty much anything one could want somebody to accomplish as a filmmaker, as a person. What drives you at this age to keep doing more?
Well, curiosity, to be honest. I've just finished a film which goes out and is being screened next week or the week after. That is a sequel to my first film. The very first film I made was about a thalidomide boy victim who had no arms when he was 4 years old. And the purpose of that was to show principals of elementary schools that these guys, the victims, may not have arms in some cases and legs, but they have brains. That was the point of the film. It was a very little modest film. It ended up on the ABC network in America. Can you believe it?
Yeah.
This half-hour film, prizes and festivals. It was shown all over the world, went into the medical school curriculum, and that's why I became a documentary director, having been in the theater. I just thought this was wonderful. So 50 years later, they gave me a tribute at BAFTA in London. And the woman who runs BBC One saw my first film and said, "That's a great film. What happened to the guy, the kid?" And he's 54 or 5 now. I said, "I don't know." She said, "Find out." And my colleague was in the front row, said, "And we'll make a film about it." And she said, "Fine." So that's what's brought me. The Monty Python people got me back to directing after I'd stopped 10 years ago, just producing since then. And so I had a ball making that film, although it was free. It was actually very difficult. We can come back to why it was so hard. And then when Charlotte had said, well, Charlotte Moore, she's called, said, "Do you want to make this film?" I said, "Sure." So I've directed 2 films in the last year, which from the reaction of the audience and critics and everybody else, they're as good as anything I've ever done, which at the age of 79 is very encouraging. Right? So I'm just curious, always curious with the next film to learn things that I didn't know already. So I'm working on a script with James about Alzheimer's patients for Channel. And I just, it's a wonderful life, Bart, making films. It's a permanent education. You just every film. Last year, 2 years ago, I made with another American filmmaker called Liz Merman 14 5-minute films in CERN in Geneva, the search for the Higgs boson, and we had access to CERN. And we showed these physicists as human beings who make jokes and make, if anyone who wants to watch this, they are on YouTube. And it was for Google, actually. They paid for them. And they're called CERN people. It's all one word, CERN people, one word.
Right.
And they're 5-minute films, and they're funny, right? Can you imagine making particle physics funny? But they're fun. So that's the privilege, of my life.
It's the ability to sort of see the world and see it from a privileged perspective. I mean, when you're there looking at a viewfinder, when you're there, you see people and get to know people that otherwise you totally wouldn't. It's the thing that kind of is so exciting.
Exactly. Can you imagine? I was on a plane, aged at that point 77, I guess, reading a short introduction to particle physics, right? I had a couple of days of interviewing the smartest people in the world about why they were looking for the smallest particle in the history of the world with the biggest machine and the most expensive machine in the history of the world. And it was a question nobody ever asked them before, and I started to laugh when I looked at the huge, this 27-kilometer tunnel and this huge thing. And the woman I was interviewing, she said, "Why are you laughing?" And I just said, you're looking for the biggest, the smallest particle in the history of the world with the biggest machine. And even if you find it, you'll never see it. You'll never be sure. Now that's funny. To me, that was funny. But it was, what a privilege, Bart. What do you think? I mean, imagine.
And to go back and edit it, which is really wonderful, because in our lives, we don't get to edit our reality. But in the films, you get to sort of see like the moments that are sort of perfect and put them together and sort of build them in a way. It's kind of, a wonderful gift in a kind of way.
Oh, yeah, definitely. But you're absolutely right, because what I think we've done, and all the people watching this who watch our film at your festival, will feel they were there, right? Yes. The O2 ticket cost a couple of $100, and to fly to London would have cost a couple, 1,000 or whatever. Who knows at that point? It was July. high season, you know, so this way they can be there, right? And anyone who says, "Oh, I can't understand particle physics, it's too hard," can watch our little film and feel close to those guys in Geneva, right? I mean, that's what we do, is we bring people together using our techniques.
But it's
And
not just being there. It's being behind the stage as they're when they're rehearsing that. I mean, what an incredible privileged moment to sort of like nobody gets that. I mean,
nobody does. That's true. Nobody does.
And we get to as documentary filmmakers experience people with their masks off, with and really get to look into their eyes and see why they do what they do in a way that if you were just at the event or saw them, you totally wouldn't have seen.
No, that's true.
And it's one of the really kind of beautiful things about the thing. Well, unless you have other things to say, I mean, Roger, I really enjoyed talking to you a lot.
It's a pleasure talking to you. I'll send you my next film, and maybe you'll want to show it next year.
You know, Roger, I'd be willing to bet you that anything you make from now on, we will show at our festival. You have
maybe next year. I'll try and come to be there when.
Oh, it would be a pleasure. I would like to have several drinks and hang out talking with you all evening, as long as we can both stay away.
Wonderful. Thank you, Bart.
Been a real pleasure. You know, let me just sort of end with this. When you sort of feel like, oh, there's this film about this thing that you really love, and you say like, I hope it's good. I hope that the filmmaking rises above just like it's them on film, and this is one that just so far goes beyond its and like when people think about it, they write about it, it's like, oh, the Pythons are doing this, and the filmmaking is really, you know, quite beautiful, and it's really wonderful. And I know that everybody who watches this will get a very different sense about the movie if they just showed up and watched it.
Well, so that's very kind. I hope it's useful. But the one thing I did want to add is how hard it was to make, because when we started, we thought we would just film the backstage thing as an observational film, and the Pythons who actually hired us said, or you know, chose us, said they wanted the history of their stage performance. That's why it's called the meaning of live. The joke on the meaning of life, right? So. We said, well, okay, there must be lots of archive. They're probably the most photographed group other than a pop group that you could imagine. And so we then said, well, where's the archive? And there wasn't any. And this is amazing. There's the Hollywood Bowl from '82, I think.
Right.
And there's my film that I made. And the rehearsal footage in our latest documentary, I shot. It's the only rehearsal footage ever shot. I did back in '76, okay? And then we used stills and soundtracks and things like that to piece together a feeling of what those shows were like in the past. But there wasn't any archive. So we suddenly had this 90-minute slot to fill, you know, with quite a lot of backstage and the performers. But we had to create the archive. It was a bit of archaeology. It's a kind of film archaeology. And I'm very proud of the editors that we had, because they really pull that off. And I'm glad you like the filmmaking so much, but I can tell you it was really hard. So well, I'm glad
my experience is most of the good things we do come out of things that are a challenge.
Yes, actually Paul Clay said anything that's too easy is not worth doing. This wasn't that easy, and it was certainly worth doing.
and again, let me just end with this. Like you said about making films, you get to meet all these people that you wouldn't see and observe these things. Running a festival, I get to meet people like you, and it's a really wonderful thing. And it's like, otherwise I would never have, you know, got a chance to talk to you. And this is just a real pleasure. It really is.
My pleasure. Thank you very much, Bart. I'm very honored and touched that you like it.
Okay. Well, thank you. Folks, come and see the film. It's, I believe, Friday night, October. Oh, it'll be on our website. But you definitely need to come and see this film. It's really wonderful. Thank you so much. It's been really great.
Take care. Have a good